March 17th, 1943. The North Atlantic, 400 miles south of Iceland. Convoy HX 229 fights through monstrous 15-ton swells. 41 merchant ships, loaded with 140,000 tons of cargo, are racing to Britain. Above deck, Captain James Bannerman stands on the bridge, his binoculars scanning the horizon, knowing what's coming. The U-boats are out there, listening. Meanwhile, in the galley of the Liberty ship William Eustace, 8-year-old cook Thomas "Tommy" Lawson scrubs dishes, unaware that his simple observations will soon change the fate of the entire convoy. What no one knows, not Captain Bannerman, not even the U-boat commanders, is that Tommy Lawson has noticed something strange about the way Liberty ships sound underwater. Something so simple, yet so profound, that it would rewrite the entire Battle of the Atlantic. The most terrifying sound you could hear wasn't the explosion of a torpedo, it was the silence before it. The year is 1943, and the Allies are in the midst of a desperate battle in the Atlantic. Each day, the U-boats continue to sink merchant ships faster than they can replace them, and the sound of death comes from under the waves. German U-boats, armed with deadly torpedoes and a new weapon, hydrophones, are listening for the hum of the convoys. These deadly submarines can hear the distinct noise made by a ship's propellers, even from miles away. And when the U-boats hear it, they move in for the kill. The Allies, despite their best efforts, are helpless. They've tried everything: zigzagging, radio silence, even active sonar, but nothing works. The problem is simple. The ocean carries sound for miles, and the U-boats are sitting silent 400 feet below, listening. In fact, the Germans have such advanced hydrophone technology that they can hear convoy ships up to 12 miles away, allowing them to calculate their position and launch a fatal strike. The situation is so dire that British Prime Minister Winston Churchill would later confess, "The only thing that really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril." The numbers tell the brutal truth. By March 1943, U-boats had sunk 567,000 tons of Allied shipping in just 1 month. At that rate, Britain has only 3 months of food supplies left. The stakes couldn't be higher. What if the key to surviving wasn't more technology? What if it was silence? Enter Tommy Lawson, a ship's cook from South Boston who never finished high school, never studied acoustics, and never expected to find himself in the middle of a battle that would determine the fate of the war. But Lawson wasn't just any cook. He was an observer, and it was his observations that would change everything. During his off hours aboard the William Eustace, Lawson developed an odd habit. He'd sneak down into the engine room, not to work, but to listen. The other crew members thought he was crazy. "Tommy's going to get himself killed down there," they'd say. "That engine room is hot as hell and twice as loud." But Lawson wasn't bothered by the heat or the noise. He was listening. On February 19th, 1943, while traveling in convoy SC-18, Lawson noticed something strange. After a ship was struck by a torpedo, the water rushing into the hull created a hollow, booming sound, and then silence. The ship had stopped making noise. The machinery, once vibrating through the water, was now silent. Lawson's mind raced. What if we could create the same silence intentionally? He grabbed the ship's engineer, a gruff Scotsman named Donald MacLeod, and tried to explain his idea. What if we flooded parts of the ship, just enough to stop the noise without sinking us? MacLeod laughed at him. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." But Lawson couldn't shake the idea. For the next 2 weeks, he sketched his plans. Water-filled chambers around the propeller shaft, ballast tanks to mute the vibrations. He showed the plans to MacLeod. "It'll never work," the engineer said. He showed them to the first mate. "You're crazy," the first mate said. He even took them to Captain Bannerman, who sighed and said, "Son, I appreciate your initiative, but leave the engineering to the engineers. Nobody took Lawson seriously. But Lawson wasn't giving up. What would you do if your idea could save lives but no one believed you? Tommy Lawson wasn't one to let go of a challenge. He knew he was onto something, and he wasn't going to let anyone stop him. One day, with 48 hours of shore leave in Liverpool, he did something no one would expect, something possibly career-ending. Lawson walked into the Western Approaches Command headquarters, asking to speak with an admiral. He was immediately arrested. "You can't be here, mate," the shore patrol officers said. "This is a restricted military facility." "I need to talk to someone about convoy noise," Lawson insisted. "I have an idea." Everyone dismissed him. Ideas from a cook, they thought. But then, a young commander named Peter Gretton, exhausted from his own battle with the U-boats, overheard Lawson. "What did you say about convoy noise?" Gretton asked, intrigued. Lawson explained his theory. He talked about the silence that happened when ships started sinking, about how the water absorbed the vibrations and rendered them invisible to U-boat sonar. "What if we could control that?" Lawson suggested. Gretton was skeptical but saw something in Lawson that others didn't. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've heard this month," Gretton said, but he didn't dismiss him. "Say that again." And just like that, Tommy Lawson was in a battle with the experts. What happens when you break the rules? A risky experiment might just save thousands of lives. Gretton, impressed by Lawson's persistence, agreed to an unauthorized test, but this wasn't going to be easy. They needed a ship, a crew, and a prototype. Gretton decided to test it on a Royal Navy ship, the HMS Sunflower, which was currently in dry dock for repairs. Over 3 days, Lawson, Gretton, and the ship's engineer, Lieutenant James Whitby, jury-rigged a makeshift version of Lawson's idea. They welded oil drums around the ship's propeller shaft, filled them with seawater, and used sandbags to simulate the weight of the water. The result? It looked like a plumbing job gone horribly wrong. But the test was set. On March 28th, 1943, the Sunflower sailed out into the Mersey River for its first test. A nearby submarine, HMS Trespasser, submerged with its hydrophones on. Lawson and the crew held their breath as they motored slowly, but when the submarine surfaced, the news was grim. "We heard you clearly. Same as always. It didn't work. Failure." But Lawson wasn't giving up. He noticed something important. The water drums weren't full anymore. They had drained. The solution was simple. They needed to seal the barrels. And so they did. 3 more days of work. New, sealed chambers. They were ready for round 2. April 2nd, 1943. They ran the test again. This time, the submarine Trespasser submerged 1,000 yards away. Minutes passed. No sound. The submarine resurfaced. "We lost you at 400 yards, the submarine captain reported. It worked. The first test worked. Now, the fate of the Atlantic hangs in the balance. The next step was massive, to implement the system across a fleet of ships. But this wasn't going to be easy. It was an unapproved modification, and it needed to be kept under wraps. They retrofitted 6 merchant ships for the upcoming convoy, Convoy 184, and sent them on their way, with Lawson overseeing the modifications. On April 25th, 1943, Convoy 184 departed Liverpool. The U-boats were watching. The German U-boat U-264 tracked the convoy for hours. The hydrophones picked up sounds from 27 ships, but there were 16 ships they couldn't hear at all. 6 of them, the modified ships, were completely silent. The results were undeniable. Over the next 18 hours, the U-boat sank 9 merchant ships, but not one of the 6 modified ships. They had survived the attack. Tommy Lawson, the cook who had dropped out of school at 14, had done what no one else could. He had found a way to make merchant ships virtually invisible to U-boat sonar. By July 1943, the system had been implemented fleet-wide, saving thousands of lives and turning the tide of the war. Lawson's idea, once ridiculed, became a cornerstone of naval warfare, and it's still used today in modern Navy ships. Tommy Lawson never sought fame or recognition. He simply noticed something that no one else did and had the courage to speak up. Would you have had the courage to challenge the experts? Do you think Lawson's simple idea was a stroke of genius or just pure luck? Share your thoughts below.